Hey, folks, another chapter read, another series of group questions, and another video. In this one, we get a lot more of Phoebe. We get a lot of uh, what Holden kind of wants or expects in relationships with the opposite sex. And finally, we get one of the more prominent symbols in the book, which we will go over. First, describe, describe Phoebe. Is Holden's description of Phoebe like his description of anyone else? What's similar? What's different? Um, Phoebe is, first of all, smart. In fact, very smart. And kind of physically resembles Allie in a lot of ways. The red hair and, just the fact that they were both young. He does say that Phoebe is more emotional, and one of the other differences is that she writes detective stories about a character named Hazel Weatherfield. Um, and so there's this idea here that he's idealizing basically youth, especially in his siblings. He thinks his siblings, both Phoebe and Allie, are great, but not himself. That shows not just self-confidence issues, but um, just kind of a low opinion of himself in general. Let's see. The other interesting kind of concept here is whether or not, especially in his view of youth and children and things like that, um, is Holden what's called an unreliable narrator. We obviously get the book from his point of view, and so we as the readers have to kind of start um, questioning, if you haven't already, whether or not his view is a purely objective one, if it's a trustworthy one. And by that, we mean, is his account of the things that happen really, again, objectively, what actually happens? Or is that the same experience for everyone else involved? Um, for example, in this chapter, we get the description of Phoebe. Well, would everyone else see that or see Phoebe as, really smart and everything else? Um, so again, keep that in mind. This idea of the unreliable narrator, because when we start to get deeper into the book and really just deeper into Holden, um, there are things that come up that we may see kind of as suspect. Maybe that didn't really happen, at least that way. And some other things, maybe not. Maybe some people are not quite what Holden, sees, and maybe they are. We don't know. Um, but good. So, um, Phoebe again, young kid, smart, um, a lot, or at least she's described as a lot like Allie. Um, and so from this, we get his view of younger people and children in general. All right. Um, then we get chapter 11. And the second question in our group work, what from reminiscing about Jane is the kind of relationship that Holden wants? Again, if we see something from a character's perspective, we see not only kind of what's going on, but that tells us something about the character, where they are emotionally or mentally, and just what their perspective is. So when we look at Holden's perspective on either Jane or relationships in general, that tells us something about Holden himself. So Holden reminisces about Jane in a very, well, sweet and innocent and really kind of childlike way. Um, and so, in a way, this kind of shows that, um, first of all, what Holden is kind of like. He's still, at least partly, a child. Um, and second, I think he's kind of the victim of nostalgia here, or at least kind of um, looking at what has happened with certain people and certain occurrences in a very kind of nostalgic way, right? Like only remembering the good stuff, not any of the bad stuff. And I know I'm kind of encroaching on number three here. And so I'm going to do two and three together. Um, most of what Holden remembers with Jane is just kind of talking to her. Um, and so, again, that's, certainly nice. And that's certainly part of a relationship. Um, but I think it goes even deeper than that. It shows that Holden is remembering those kind of smaller, intimate moments that he has, not just with Jane, not just with someone of the opposite sex, but really just with anyone else. Um, and he kind of really likes that. And he really, to be honest, he really needs that. Um, and so it seems like Holden wants a relationship that's not complicated. He wants one that's kind of really basic, I guess, filled with talking, um, which is great when you're a kid, um, but to have that simplicity when you're adult is much more difficult, um, and probably even as a teenager, you've got responsibilities, school. Most of you probably had a job, or at least will have a job soon, which means money and bills. You might have, interference from parents or, friends who are kind of uh, vying for your time and energies. And so by wanting this kind of just this relationship where that's built on just talking to each other, it's kind of overly simplistic, certainly for adults, um, but it's also a very childlike relationship as well. So, um, oh, one more thing that I wanted to add with number three. What does reminiscing about Jane show us about how he remembers Jane? And knowing his actions presently, how does he react to Jane now? So we've gone over how he remembers her. Um, and I think a lot of time, well, yeah, there's a duality here, which is appropriate for Holden, as we've seen. You're remembering the nice things about the relationship and about Jane, but he kind of becomes sad. And I think it's more than just, oh, I don't have that now, or she's not around right now. Um, I think Holden's sadness is coming from the fact that, I mean, yes, she's not around, but that also means that he doesn't have anyone to either just talk to or really just open up to and connect to. Um, okay, good. So that was chapter 11. Chapter 12. In chapter 12, once again, we see the ducks on the pond. And again, this is the second time. He asks the cab driver about them, and the cab driver kind of just says, Why are you worried about where the ducks go? Who cares? Doesn't matter. Um, and so on and so forth. So this really is, along with like his red hunting hat and a few other symbols, is one of the main symbols that a lot of people, a lot of educators, a lot of critics, a lot of, whatever, um, kind of hold as part of the important themes of the book and of Holden. So, what does it mean? Um, there's I've done this book for a few years. I've heard a couple of different theories on what the ducks mean, what the pond means, what the, Central Park means, what winter means, things like that. I will say this: winter is oftentimes kind of synonymous, or at least kind of symbolizes, well, death, pretty much. Um, Even most recently in Game of Thrones, when they had that whole winter is coming, that's pretty much what that meant. um, when winter comes, not just in nature things die, but certainly in Game of Thrones, the expectation was you're going to die. And so winter has this huge connection with death and dying. And of course, who do we know as dying in this story? That is, of course, Allie. Um, I'm stopping myself from saying more things it's because they will be spoilers. Um, so, if even in a very simple way, we've got the kind of context of death, maybe if and we know Allie has passed away, um, then we think, okay, well, maybe if Allie is the ducks, then maybe what Holden is actually asking about is not so much, where do the ducks go when the, pond freezes over. It's more along the lines of where do people, or where does Allie go after you die? And so, of course, it becomes this really existential question that's kind of wrapped up in migratory birds, really. Um, so I think you'll see this one more time. Um, I've heard a couple of different things. Again, you can look at it in terms of, which characters are represented in that, who's doing what at what time. Um, there is this idea of the pond freezing over, who is then freezing. Again, you could probably have a couple of answers to that. But keep that in mind. One of many things to keep in mind as we go through and as we see the story and as we see Holden and what happens to him, and of course where he ends up. So uh, that's it for this one. Hopefully it clears it up and gets into and kind of you guys understand a little bit better the symbols in here and where Holden is at and what he wants and things like that. So that's it. I will see you in the next chapters.